right. Get that recording. So first thing, we're just some updates on how's everybody doing before I like jump right in. Everybody's good? Yay. All right. All right. Let's see. Awesome possum. I've got Moodle in student mode so I can show you where we've now fixed the lab assignment. So in student mode, I can show you where this is. So if you go to week 5, and if you scroll down, you'll see this little hand with a file or square, looks like a file. If you click on that at the bottom, that'll give you where you can submit your lab assignment. So if you go to week 5, scroll down to lab number 1 and add submission. So that'll get you to where that is possible. And if you have any issues, please do email me. And then if you're having any issues with your lab assignment that is due in a week, I will stay on after our session so that I can answer any questions, or we can troubleshoot any issues that you might be having. Any questions there? All right. So I started our conversation. I did put in the chat our first question from our discussion for the section. And I also encourage you, if you've got any connection issues where you may not be able to come on audio, by all means, please do put any responses that you would like in the chat. So I want this to be engaging as possible for everybody, regardless of connection. So please do use the chat. Thanks to you, that those of you that have been doing that with other sessions and sharing either insights or resources as we go along, because an hour flies by with you all. I'm hoping it flies by for me. I hope it flies by for you, and that you all are getting a lot out of the conversation with each other, because I think there's in the university, this is, how it works too. If there's a lot of value in the conversation between each of you and learning from each other and the different contexts that you're in and the different experiences, because regardless of where you are in the globe and regardless of where you are in your career or what you're doing work-wise, you all are all leaders in some way, shape, or form. And that I think really shapes your perspective on leadership. That is interesting to share with everybody here too. So just wanted to mention that in terms of the chat. Please use that as much as you can as we do these sessions if you're not able to hop into the conversation. So in the chat right now, something to think about is, what is your role or roles in your community? So if you want to tell us which community, I gave you a couple examples, and while I'll read those examples, and if you want to describe your community and the leadership role that you have in it, I mentioned, for example, in my nonprofit community, that's a fairly large kind of deal, right? So whether that's online or local, I have both a designated leadership role and a implied leader role. And we're going to talk about all 3 of those as you all share your leadership roles. So in Moodle, I posted 3 kinds of leaders when we talk about leadership roles. So one is an implied leader. And by definition, those are folks that that defer to that person just out of rank or experience, and sometimes I think charisma. Some leaders that may not have a formal title, but you're drawn to in some way. So I think charisma has a lot to do with that, in addition to the definition that I've given you of rank or experience. Then we have emergent leaders, those who kind of rise out of discussions, deliberations, as some sort of leader. So definitely within your classes as groups, or even within formal or informal teams or groups in your communities, someone may become an emergent leader, someone that you feel naturally became the leader of the group based on, again, their kind of charisma, how they help others, how they kind of lead conversation and perspective. And then last but not least, and I think what the most kind of not necessarily accepted, but I would say what we sometimes defer to whenever we think of a leader is a designated leader, someone who has been selected or elected, appointed to an official role that usually has some sort of title. So implied, emergent, and designated. So Herman at least shares his leadership, or at least his community. And I would think too, within that community, you have a lot of different roles, and probably one of implied or also emergent. Anybody want to share in the chat, please do, your community and the role that you play in that community. Organize people and create leadership training centers, and also the owner of small land here. Yeah, so in terms of being a landowner and that being leadership, that's certainly something that's either emergent or sometimes even implied, if you want to think of it that way. So what are your roles? And even if you want to share verbally instead of chat, please do, if that's easier for you to share. Welcome, Fabienne. Fabienne. Don't be too shy. Yeah, thanks, Carly.
Yeah, I think within so thinking about my community and my role in my work, I would say that I'm a designated leader. And I think a lot about, I do all of our volunteer coordination. So that is part of my role. It is something I was hired for. And so our volunteers who really run our programs defer to me because of that. And then thinking about within the office and my relationship with my coworkers, I think of myself more as an emergent leader. I think when we have projects, I tend to kind of lead on those and take responsibility in that way.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. You know, being a volunteer, well, I guess in your role, even as a guiding volunteers, you're paid, right? So that's a designated leader, but a lot of you also serve as a volunteer leader of volunteers, right? It's kind of a different role to play. Anyone else, please do share.
I guess I'm also a designated leader. By nature of my job, I play two roles in my organization. One is I'm the chief administrative officer. So I'm actually designated as the chief administrative officer, due to my experience in the organization, my profession, and because of that. The other role that I play is I also happen to be the country coordinator for the Global Water Partnership country office in Bhutan. So the country coordinator is selected from the host institution in the country. And the Global Water Partnership host institution in my country is the institute that I'm in, that is the Royal Society for Protection of Nature. So the country coordinator is being selected from one of the staffs who is eligible to be the country coordinator for the Global Water Partnership. So in both the cases, I guess I am the designated leader.
Thank you for sharing. So when it comes to implied, emergent, or designated, is there one of those that you would prefer to be just by definition? Or is there one that based on your personality and your leadership style, which we will start kind of diving into here soon, based on your personality, your leadership type, would you rather be a designated leader or an emergent leader or an implied leader?
So I feel sometimes you can kind of swap around through all three of those. I had an instance where I was in college and before I transferred schools, all of my friends wanted to have an improv club. I have no idea why, but everyone wanted to have an improv club, and they're like, "Oh, let's start one." And next thing you know, I kind of just step up, like, "Hey, I can get it set up. I know nothing about improv, but I know how to start a club, so I'll start the club." So I started the club, and when it came down to who should be president, vice president, and hold those types of leadership roles, everyone just kind of said, "Well, you're already there, so why don't you do it?" And so I was just the president of this improv group, even though I was terrible at improv and know nothing of improv. But I feel like, and even when I stepped down, whenever people had questions, they would just kind of look to me for the answers for it, even though I still don't know anything about improv. I just know how to collect people together to get things done. So I feel like as a leader, sometimes you can go through the different types of leadership roles,
Mm-hmm.
and
So
they may change.
if you've shared with folks that like your experience in some things, but maybe either lack of experience or this is new to me, how did they react to that? Did they say, well, what you do know outweighs what you don't know?
I was kind of the glue in the friends group that kind of held everybody together. I was also the most organized individual out of all of us, and I had a lot of free time. So
You need something to do.
basically, and they're like, "Well, you're going to be transferring, so it'd be really cool for you to have this little side project." And I'm like, "Okay."
Gotcha.
I still don't know how to do improv, but here we are. I have an improv club that I started just because.
Hey, sometimes just because is good enough, right?
Yeah, like even though it may not be something that you're interested in, sometimes people still look to you because like they may admire you and you might have positive qualities as like a leader or a role model, and so you end up starting an improv club for them.
Anybody else want to share, like, is there one type of the three kinds of leadership roles that you would prefer? One's not really necessarily better than the other.
I find myself preferring either emergent or designated leadership roles, and for different reasons. As a designated leader, sometimes you don't always have the choice to become the leader in that way. So I think that can be a downside, but you do have more of that automatic clout, and it can be easier to accomplish whatever your mission is if people kind of defer to your title. And as an emergent leader, I think you have a lot more choice to choose projects that you're passionate about and, rise up when you feel called to do so or when you're inspired to do so. So I think that is a benefit of that leadership style or leadership title.
I like that you have a choice as an emergent leader as opposed to designated. Grace?
I think I'm drawn to people in the implied leadership role, and I think you had a good word, the charisma, because when I was making my list for possible leaders to interview, I didn't even think of these three words until you posted them, and I read them. I was like, oh, I think that most of the people that I think of as leaders are very charismatic, and like people are drawn to them. And that's like a quality that I look for in leaders, even if they are designated leaders. I think that I'm drawn to that. If it's confidence or like their style, you know.
And sometimes it's even though we may not know it, a fake it till you make it leader that turn out to be implied and have the most charisma. They're like, well, I'm going to give this a whirl. So then in terms of the designated leadership role, do you all feel that of the three might be I don't want to say always easiest to perform, but if you're given, now you may earn, of course, a designated role, but it's assigned, it's not ambiguous, right? It is very defined, and it's usually a role that you wanted or you applied for, you were hired for, so you know exactly what it is that you're supposed to do. So is that make it easier to be a designated leader as opposed to emergent or implied?
I do not think so, because some people are not meant to be leaders. And although they may have some great qualities, some great leadership qualities, they just may not be the right person for that role.
And then when someone is selected for a role, Casey, what do you see happening from that? If they were picked for a designated leadership role and it's not a good fit for them, have you seen anything come out of that, like good or bad?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is disconnect between the team that you're supposed to be leading and you. No matter how hard you try, your team isn't just going to lie down and do that. But then I think that's where that forced relationship comes in, is, well, okay, well, I was hired for this role, you will do what I ask. And then it's a forced relationship, and that just creates more of a negative, even could lead to a toxic work relationship.
And
So that's what's really interested about the implied leaders, because the definition you have here is those who defer because of rank or expertise. And the expertise thing is getting me, because somebody could be considered a subject matter expert, and then that expertise is being, what am I trying to say? Sometimes it's false expertise, and then they're faking, as you said, faking it until they're making it, but they're giving out false information or false facts or false information because they're trying to fake that expertise.
So even an implied leader may not necessarily be an implied leader because they're putting on a facade rather than being, well, they could still use charisma to their benefit, but not their team or those that they're working with.
Right. I don't know. I saw expertise and I was like, that's interesting.
Well, and some things with implied, maybe not always expertise, but yeah, not necessarily what they've sold in a bad way.
Right.
But those that may turn out to be an implied leader because they have put on it's a lot to think about. So when it comes to the grassroots work that you all are doing, for some of you, does a designated leader feel like it doesn't belong? Like when you think about seed scale, you think for those of you who have been exposed to seed scale, there's a lot of bottom up leadership, right? Things come from community members, not necessarily always somebody that was hired to do a job. So then does designated leader feel like it's an opposition to the bottom up or the side to side, not necessarily always the top down. That's what we start to think about a designated leader, like a city council member, or someone who's elected or is over an entire organization. Does designated leader feel like then it's like, doesn't fit?
I think maybe designated leader can have positive outcomes, especially if, or since everyone kind of has an idea, understanding like what the outlines of those responsibilities are, especially considering like, I know like some of us were Peace Corps members and like thrown into these types of leadership roles. And so we were designated leaders. But it still works with the bottom up, I guess, type of thing. If you look at it in terms of your designated leader is still listening to the wants and the needs of the community and finding those resources to make it work.
So it almost sounds like the positive parts of implied leader that Casey was mentioning may work for a designated leader if they have empathy.
Hopefully Peace Corps members would have empathy. Like that's what I'm hoping. I feel like a lot of us have that wanting to help the community out of the kindness and goodness of our hearts type of thing. But I can definitely see how it would go bad.
Gotcha. Carlene or Casey, saw you come off mute.
Yeah, sorry. I do have another comment about this. So I'm very hesitant when it comes to designated leaders on a community-based level because it always, most of the time ends up, well, Joe Schmo helped me get my neighbor's dogs out of the yard, so I'm gonna vote for him. And that makes me so mad because then you don't get your lower level community members involved and they always get excluded from designated leadership. You do an emergent leader style, at least they have an opportunity to get a part of the game and get a part of that discussion. And Miss Sue, 90-year-old Miss Sue, maybe she hasn't got an opportunity to actually bring the wealth of knowledge that she gets in that. So Miss Sue is like, oh yeah, maybe we should kind of put her in this leadership opposed to Joe Schmo, so I think an emergent leadership style would be best for community-based development.
And I tend to agree with Casey. I maybe have a jaded perspective of Peace Corps in some ways, but I think coming in as, an American with this designated title, there's a lot of power and privilege in that I don't necessarily think is earned, or I don't know. I think that in a lot of ways we can overshadow the work that's already being done in a community. So that's my take.
I think we need to start a Peace Corps support group.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I'm coming off mute. I'm a little cold, but Carlene, I 1000% agree because I had a lot of my friends, they would ask, with it's privilege being an American, especially a white American in Peace Corps. And then a lot of the communities relied heavily on their expertise. And I had a lot of friends that would go research or Google something and they'd come back to that community to present the information. And they just give them all the credit for all that without saying, no, I actually had to research this. And that bothered me. And I just wish people that were doing international development like that to give credit to what they don't know and what they do know and how to teach those community members how to go and find that information rather than to say, oh, I have all the information, choose me, pick me.
Amir, you bring up an interesting point here that a designated leader can also play an emergent leader role. What is there something like personality wise that you're driven by, or anyone else want to share where a single person in their leadership role as a defined or designated leader would also be an emergent leader? And this was based off of Amir's comment. If you wanted to elaborate further, please do too.
I think that would be the top down. Your top down perspective is encouraging those lower level community members to be involved and to be active in group discussion and civic leadership.
You know, and I want to bring in some of our international folks in this conversation, because Casey, you bring up a very hard point of the privilege piece, because we see it, but in different ways especially in more rural communities in the US, and a more accepted way of leadership in other countries is because of either privilege, which comes with money, it comes with power that is already given, or even down to what's accepted, like whether that's bribes, it's somebody has been in one family, someone has lived in this part, say one community for generations, and there's privilege in that. So I'm curious in terms of other perspectives in other countries, especially Asia and Africa, where some of this may be just accepted as a leadership role because of power, privilege, or just acceptance. It's a very hard question.
I don't know whether I followed it up well. I think it depends on that community, how much they have known about each other. I mean, designated leadership, I mean, it's very, it seems, I mean, that very democratic, and even the grassroots is very, sometimes it's workable if the other is not influence the implied the leadership. For example, if all the community members gathered, even including chief or some elder, but they elected in secret, and they agreed what criteria could be the proper person for this leadership role, and that and they already know each other, so meaning is they know the expertise, they know the character, even emergence, I mean, not necessarily emergence leadership during the desk competition, because they already knows that, then they elect and agree together. That I think it make it peaceful and workable, the selection.
Or if we take countries that eventually are under military control. So like Casey, you mentioned forced acceptance. If we have military rule, that is forced on communities whether they liked it or not, right? So like right now in Ethiopia, right now, which has been there for decades, in Burma/Myanmar, where there's forced acceptance because there's either military rule or dictatorship. Georgie, did you have something to add to that one?
Well, I think in Bhutan is a different, you know, the way leadership is being selected, or whether he emerges as a leader, I think it's a different thing, because Bhutan, democratically, Bhutan is very young. So, but from my own perspective, what I feel is leadership, especially if you have to emerge as a leader, you have to have a very good, quality in yourself, which actually other people should feel that you deserve to be a leader. You are a better leader than others. I mean, from a group of people, the group of people unanimously will have to believe that you can perform the roles and responsibilities better than others. So in terms of that, I think if you want to emerge as a good leader, you have to be a good performer as well. But at the same time, I think a leader that I have described in my leadership that I have chosen somebody who has actually emerged as a leader, not because he has good connections or not because his jobs are defined, but I think he has inspired a lot of people around the country, around the world. I think I've also written how he actually emerged as a good leader and how he inspired me to look up to him as a leader. So from that perspective, I think the leader has to be, as I said, he has to prove that he can inspire others as leader. He can make people believe that he can be a good leader. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Professor, I just wanted to add, I mean, when we talk about force acceptance, so in Indian context, I would say it's more of, caste-based leadership. So, I mean, I guess in Western countries, there are more of like class-based when we talk. But in Indian context, I see even in small rural community, even there is like a whole this caste-based hierarchy and then caste-based leadership. Even if the even if a person who has the ability or who can be an emergent leader, but if he belongs to lower caste, he won't be able to you know play the role of a leader, or other people will not consider him um, as a leader. So I think when we talk about force acceptance, this caste as well play an important role in leadership in Indian context, if I say.
So Gunjan, do you feel like that's changing at all? I mean, this has been like centuries, right, of a caste system. But do you feel like that's changing at all?
I guess because so currently where I am working and staying here, the situation is not very good in terms of this caste based system. So yes, there have been some changes, but I would say in the rural community, especially, there is this discrimination still there, and which is also one of the reason why. Uh, Even if I talk about the whole leadership in the context of India, there have not been very significant changes or uh, better leadership that have been evolved. So then one of the reason is also this caste based leadership, or and even the family ties, which we have already talked about, that yes, there have been class based leadership as well, and then there is someone from your family, and then that gets preference for the leader. So yeah.
Thank you for that perspective, which there's parts of that from several of you that I want to see if we can dive into a little bit more further. Is this difference in leadership between urban and rural? Because I don't think that's necessarily geography limited. We see it in the US, we see it in Asia. I would assume with some of you that are in Africa, there's very much a difference in leadership roles and types and between rural and urban. Why do we think there's sometimes very limited opportunity or kind of accepted because of family or because of a certain system in rural areas that would not be the case in urban. And we can speculate here as to why that happens.
I don't know the other, but Asia and Africa is mostly a bit, we're shy. We're not. We hesitate to be a leader. We think it's a bit rude, and we forced it, and culturally forced to to forced it. I don't know to respect the elder, especially village level. So it doesn't matter your capability or your background, but this guy, this gentleman is eldest, and Asia and especially rural area is very real respect. I mean, in Malay, and in Malay is the same situation. And if you go to the village, they're not very comfortable to speak out before elder, and we thought it's a bit rude to speak up freely, and being a leadership, being and taking the leadership is, we think, a bit rude. So it's not, thing.
I'm in a very rural area in Appalachia, and I think that our leadership styles here follow similar, like you were saying. It's like it's rude. Like if somebody has like an idea and they're not, there's like almost like this like a way of communicating that you have to listen to them, listen to the elders first. Like you have to like get to know them. And I've had to adjust because I've been here almost 5 years, but it's still like I call a leader because I need their help, but I can't just call them and say, hey, can you help me with this? But it's like, how's it going? What, like, you have to like ease into this conversation. And I think that's very cultural. I don't know if that's like a rural thing, like a lot of places. But the other point I wanted to mention is that there is this expectation, I think, from certain families. There's also a sense of corruption sometimes, where it's like these people have the money and the power, and they're going to pay off or be able to buy whatever kind of influence they've always had. And it's like frustrating.
Grace, when you talk about elders, are you just kind of referring to a bunch of old white guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I figured that's what that was, because it's the exact same here as well.
Yeah. And it is sometimes church elders. Like, I think they have a lot of clout and like they carry certain power, but it's not necessarily like a religious term. Sometimes it is, but.
Yeah, Grace, I can second that actually. And yes, Casey, where I lived, it was also a whole bunch of old white people. Unfortunately, well, maybe not unfortunately, but for me, it was a big experience because I've lived in Atlanta for a long time, and then I moved to a very, very small, like I want to say population 2,000 people town in middle of Georgia where no one has ever heard of it. And the community members were all the, I guess, like older individuals, but it was individuals who were like well established because of their I guess they had a lot of money, and like their family has a lot of property in that area, and they were also like the leaders at like different churches, and those types of organizations were usually through the church, and like the only way into that community was to be a part of the church. And it was really awkward not being a part of the church and people kind of just like trying to force you into it. I guess it was very, very odd. And there was kind of this I guess, back and forth between the older generation and the newer generation, because there was also a college located there, which was the only reason why I was there. But the college there, you had a lot more exposure, I guess, in education. So the youth were exposed to some diversity. They were exposed to different ways of thinking. And so there's kind of clash between the older and the younger generation. And so the younger generation would end up leaving and going to cities like Atlanta and such. And then you have the older generation complaining, why is it the youngsters always go to school and then they leave? And it's like, well, you don't provide opportunities for them here. And so they find other locations that they can be leaders. So I definitely feel that same sentiment, like that you're talking about, Grace, where like the older people, like, and yes, you can't just come out and ask them a question. You have to like have a whole conversation with them. Like, how's your family? I really don't care too much about your family, but how's your family? Yeah, let's lead into that. And I definitely saw some of that as well, like when I was staying in Armenia. Whenever you wanted to get anything done at all, it always started off with coffee. And it was coffee and cakes and candy, and say goodbye to your waistline, because you want to get any work done, you gotta have coffee with them first. So I feel it. I really do.
So I'm hearing like clout based on a number of things: money, land, family, or in like Gunjan's case, and probably several other, like a class system or caste system, religion, age, and education, and race. We have race in there, or ethnicity. So I think some of this too that you all have mentioned is a difference between individualistic cultures and collectivist cultures. So very much in the US, it's very much individualistic. We don't take care of our elders in the same way that collectivist cultures do. And I think in at least the rural areas that I've been in before, that might be some of the exception, where you've got like 3 or 4 generations on the same farm or in the same house. But in collectivist cultures, you have that too. Very much you take care of those that are older generations than you. But we also see that people are living longer, with the exception of COVID, taking a year off of lives at this point. But people live longer now. And so the opportunity is still limited, especially in designated roles like jobs, because people are retiring later, because people are staying in the job force longer. Those of us that might be younger generations aren't able to achieve the same kind of opportunity that generations before us were able to achieve, which I think makes leadership more difficult as we go on, because people are living longer as we like develop, right? So, but I do want to kind of touch on that collectivist versus individualistic cultures that may drive how we view leadership. I think regardless of where we find ourselves with geography, does that change over time? Or maybe how we care for older generations, does that affect how you view leadership? And also with kind of the, I mean, that's not an easy question to answer, as many of the questions we've had are not easy, but also very frank, being very, in your responses, please be as frank as possible, or as much as you would like to be, about what you're seeing. So in many of our cases, it is older white generations that we're dealing with.
Erica, do you mind to re-ask your question, please?
So are we thinking that like more so the collectivist versus individualistic? Does leadership change based on that kind of culture, collectivist versus individualistic? Because we have respect, I think, more so in a collectivist culture for those older generations and how we view and respect their leadership roles or their influence versus individualistic ones where there may not be that kind of influence or respect.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I could definitely see a designated leader tend to be more the individualistic communities, and emergent leaders be more the collective communities.
Casey, you stole the words like right out of my brain. That's amazing. I also agree. I feel like in some of the more collectivist like groups, you see a lot of like implied leaders because of like their rank in the community versus individualists where you have like someone who's just like someone who is designated and given that role.
Sorry, typing questions also in chat to kind of encourage some of us from more collectivist. And it does feel different. I think regardless if it's say a northern like Western hemisphere kind of perspective or North American versus a more global perspective, we still have very much a collectivist culture or society in pockets. But do you feel like in one over the other, leadership is nurtured from generations? Yes, Amar, very much a lot of designated because of exactly what we've kind of talked about in that clout, right? So in collectivist cultures, we may have more clout because of what we mentioned: money, land, family, religion, race, education, but more so maybe that land, that family perspective, or even religion based on where we are. Yeah, I love, so it is really interesting to feel like we've made progress, and I'm going to use a very much an American perspective on this, that we've made so much progress in many ways, but at the same time, in our rural communities, there is still very much this need. I mean, it is more so a need than want to rely on others in our local community because of either limited resources and some and clout, all of those things, but sometimes just limited resources and limited populations. There's only so many people in a county and only so many people that want to serve in a leadership role versus say get to, right? So and Herman's also sharing. So sorry, it's a difficult to hear, Herman, but thanks for letting us know. Crowded with protesters. All right, so protesters, someone's got to lead protests, right? So is there an emergent, I think that's very much an emergent leader kind of space. Sometimes we may not want to. So I want to, in our last 8 minutes, ask this question. Do you consider yourself an implied leader at any part of your community? So someone that is just sought out by others. And how does that make you feel? So we're going to get into a little of the like touchy-feely, share if you'd like, you don't have to, but whenever somebody labels you or you are self-aware and you've recognized I am an implied leader because I am sought out for XYZ, how does that make you feel? And I've said specifically here, does it make you feel self-conscious, humbled, or empowered, encouraged? Sometimes I think we have a little guilt with implied leader, but do you see yourself, anyone see themselves as an implied leader, and how does that affect you?
This might be a little different than exactly what you're asking, but I see the organization I work for as an implied leader in the community. We're a mental health organization, and people, especially lately, have really been seeking us out to do public presentations and press releases and talk one-on-one about how to navigate services. And in that area, it feels really good to know that we're seen as a leader, that our work is being recognized, that we're having the reach we want to have, and that we're doing something helpful. I think it's what you want as an organization, to be sought out and not always having to do the reach. So in that context, it's empowering and encouraging.
Ratio is very much daunting. Anybody else want to share their perspective as an implied leader, if you feel like or think that you are? I think it's the hardest one. It's hard to say no. Yeah, Matt?
I fall somewhere in that realm of student facing daily, being in front of youth. I don't ever go to work and say, I'm a leader, and this is what we need to do. But I think I also try to, I think my typical lifestyle is kind of that implied leadership, and I don't, I tend not to try and seek out the attention or, I guess, yeah, very much like, I just do it and hope that people like see it. But other than that, there's not much more of an expectation around it. So I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think you have an interesting facet to that is we can't expect to be known as a implied leader. We can hope, maybe. But I think this also goes back to June's comment either last week, the week before, about the feeling of responsibility. And you take it because you feel like because of where I am or my ability, I have responsibility to this individual or this community. And part of that, with that responsibility comes implied leadership. People are seeking and you're able.
I'm
Yeah,
not
I agree. Sorry.
Sorry, you can go. Right. So I have some question. So implied leadership is not only coming from outside, but can be from myself.
So it comes from like internal motivation.
Yeah, internal motivation.
Yeah. Interesting. Internal motivation.
Yeah, that is a question.
But I like the responsibility piece that you mentioned before, because you take on a leadership role when you've taken the responsibility to help someone.
Sorry,
You've
Erica.
assumed responsibility.
I think that was a question, if implied leadership comes from the community or if it's implied.
Yeah. So
Yes.
in a way, your actions have encouraged the community to see you as an implied leader, but it's not on your part to be expected, right? So you can't expect to be, like Matt mentioned, you can't expect to be viewed as an implied leader, but you taking the responsibility of a task or helping someone help puts you in a place of potentially an implied leader, or people will see you as an implied leader because you've taken responsibility. Hopefully that's clear as mud, makes sense. Something to think about too is that responsibility piece. But I think even if you don't see yourself as an implied leader, which I think is a hard self-aware question, because sometimes I think if we're trying to do good, it's hard for us to say, well, yeah, I'm an implied leader. We don't want to be seen as selfish or aggressive or overbearing, or that it is something we deserve, right? But it is sometimes the best type of leadership for grassroots work, for leading a community, than sometimes our designated leaders are. So something to think about, especially as we work through some other things to be more self-aware of our leadership type. So a lot of great things to think about. Great conversation and shared insights. And thank you for adding to the chat for those of you who may not be able to share via audio. So thank you all for such awesome conversation. I hope that leaves you all with a lot to think about in your leadership roles and how you view leadership and take on leadership, and sometimes even say no to being a leader in some respects. So if anybody is having any issues or has questions about your labs, I will stay on for answering those. And I will see you back here next week.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Have a good one.
Hi, Amir. Hi.
Bye.
And Herman, did you have any questions about the lab assignment or other things pertaining to the class that I can answer?